It's a pure hell.
For a week, the prisoners were subjected to 5 specific interrogation techniques, most of which have been used in the current War on Terror. Nick van der Bijl served with the Intelligence Corps in Northern Ireland. He was not involved with these interrogations, but he is familiar with the 5 techniques used. From the start, the hooded men, now in boiler suits, were made to stand for hours at a time in stress positions against a wall.
False standing is to reduce physical strength. We need to reduce that individual's mental ability and his physical ability to withstand interrogations.
Fingertips, toes, legs spread out. You try to step back off the wall to have a go, you were just simply battered, put back up again. And your arm just sort of froze. Your legs froze, your back was strained, your head went down. And then the noise started, the white noise.
And it was like an old television set that had ceased broadcasting but hadn't been switched off. So there was just that loud hissing sound.
White noise is essentially, it's a bit like a high-frequency radio that has a sort of mush, and if I go shh, a bit like that. A little bit louder, obviously.
It stopped you thinking, it stopped you concentrating on anything.
To disorientate the prisoners further, other sounds were introduced.
The worst one was the sound of a firing squad. Men in a loud voice giving the order to present arms and to fire. As well as that, there was sort of funeral music.
They were deprived of adequate food, water and sleep.
It is physically and mentally demanding to be deprived of sleep, and I need to keep that going in order that I can keep a shock of capture going. C'est la vie, that's the way it goes in an interrogation centre. It's not a nice place.
During this whole time, I was defecating and urinating in the boiler suit, that whole week.
The humiliating conditions were part of a deliberate policy of softening up the men before interrogation. The prisoners were stripped and pictures taken.
I remember they took me out of the room, stood me against the wall in the nude and stood with his arm round me and had himself photographed with me in the nude. You were being dragged down the corridor, the dogs would be howling at you. Number 8, say hello to that dog, you bastard, you. You know, say good morning to the dog.
A prisoner is a simple source of intelligence, as much as intelligence as a document or a photograph or a dead body or a piece of information that might come from a patrol. He's just a simple asset within that intelligence cycle, nothing more.
And they were asking you the most stupid questions. Like, you know, who's in the IRA? Who do you know in the IRA? I hadn't a clue who was in the IRA.
I felt rather proud at the time to be part of a small unit that was getting this information from bombers and killers and IRA sympathisers.
Even if it meant using torture?
Yeah. I was starting to make up stories, just to give them names of people about who were in the IRA. But they were neighbours of mine, people who I knew weren't in the IRA.
Then I remember this stage during interrogation, your name. And I spelled it Francie right, but I couldn't spell McGuigan. Couldn't spell it, and they kept saying, "Ah, you stupid soul, you can't even spell your own name. Ah, you're gone. Count to 10, go on, count to 10. I bet you can't count to 10. And I said, no, there's no way I can count to 10, just in case I can't count to 10. They're just going to drive me mad. That's what they're going to do. They're setting out now to drive me absolutely mad.
Several days of this treatment induced psychotic symptoms in some of the prisoners.
The noise became all-invasive. The beatings were extreme. And it was that accumulation together that made it systematic and more dangerous for me than what any one of them would have been on their own. I was a blob in the corner.
I saw my own funeral. I saw the hearse in front of the door where I lived at that time, and I can see it yet. That is still in my mind.
I threw myself down, literally trying to break my neck. And when I was laying on the ground after doing it, I'd only hurt my head and split my head open. But I cried because I didn't die.
What was certainly effective was the end result, i.e. that those individuals were prepared to spill their guts to their interrogators. My understanding is that the IRA in Londonderry had been almost blown apart by the information that some of these people had given. So it became effective, extremely effective.
After 8 days, the detainees were transferred away from the interrogation centre. After the use of these methods became public knowledge, the British government banned them. They and the British Army had discovered that it was one thing to use these techniques against a foreign enemy, another to employ them against your own civilian population.
So painful, unpleasant. I get the impression you'd do it again.
No, I don't think that's true, because I have learnt my lesson that society will not permit me to do it again. And I'm the servant of the society in which I find myself.
But society might have to choose sometimes.
Well, let society choose, and I think most soldiers would be very willing to do the job.
This was a valuable resource which was removed. And I felt it probably lengthened the campaign in Northern Ireland.
The British government was taken to court over its treatment of the hooded men. It was found guilty, not of torture, but of inhuman and degrading treatment. That distinction formed part of recent legal advice to the White House about US interrogation methods.
You've seen in Iraq now where the same thing is happening there, and I've seen this prisoners made to walk like dogs, and it just brought it all back to me, and my heart went out to these people. They're probably feeling all the same fear, panic, anxiety we all felt.
I would never dream now of doing the things that I did when I was in Vietnam. People don't realize that when you're thrown into a situation like that, into a war, you know, it's like they expect you to, 1 minute you're trying to kill the guy, and the next minute he's sitting in front of you, and you're supposed to ask him, "Sir, would you please tell me where you hid your weapon that you were shooting at me with?" It doesn't work that way. The brutality doesn't stop when the shooting stops.
UVC? Yeah, UVC. Huh? UVC?
Confronted by a different type of warfare in Vietnam, guerrilla fighters hiding among a civilian population, this time it was the Americans who were perpetrators of abuse, as well as victims.
We'll bring you back.
The Vietnam era was an era that was new and unique in American military history because the Vietnam War was a war, much as the Iraqi war is today, where the enemy is pretty much unknown. So today, the American soldier operating in Iraq would basically draw upon the experiences of Vietnam to justify any action he takes.
Well, this prisoner claims to be a member of a a company, a battalion, a regiment, the numbers of which sound doubtful to us.
You think he's lying?
Yes, I think he is.
A Viet Cong prisoner had come into the aid station, and this guy was involved in an ambush or something. He was hurt. There was a major, not getting anything out of him, takes a pencil and starts prodding the open wounds to gain information out of him. And I'm a new guy in country. I've never seen anything like this in my life, you know? I'm shocked. Nobody said anything. Nobody did anything. I realized then, anything goes. Anything goes. This guy had information that I thought was important. So as a last resort, after we had all taken a shot at the guy and got absolutely nothing out of him, nothing, we decided to use the field phone. We've got his feet in a container of water. The field phone has two clips, you know, positive and a negative. So we clipped one to his ear and one to his testicle or inside of his thigh. I didn't really give a shit. I didn't care. Just hooked the guy up. And we cranked the phone. And the more you crank, the faster you crank, the more electricity it generates. And it was like the guy was having seizures, drooling, and, you know, it was unpleasant. It was unpleasant. Again, nothing. We got nothing out of this guy.
Unimpressed by the poor results from physical torture, Zagalonis now tried a more psychological method, exploiting his most powerful asset, fear.
People were surprised that dogs were being used in Guantanamo and in Abu Ghraib. I thought it was a great idea myself. What we did is we would tell the Vietnamese that the dog is trained to sense when they're lying. Didn't tell them the dog was going to kill them, didn't threaten them with the dog, just the dog knows when you're lying, so you make sure you tell us the truth. So the dog would raise up and be in this guy's face, you know, just slathering, fangs, you know, wanting to bite his face off. And they're backed up against the wall, and, I mean, they would, lose control of their bladder. And in a way, it was funny, but at the time, I wasn't killing the guy and I wasn't hurting him. I was scaring him. So I didn't see anything wrong with it, you know? I mean, this was, again, it was coercion. It wasn't torture.
Zagalonis became more creative with the mind games he played on prisoners.
When people were evacuated from their hamlet, we would tie their hands behind their back and put a sandbag over their head. All right, so they're on the helicopter, they're flying, no idea of how high, how far, direction they've gone, or anything. They get off the helicopter, they see American Jeeps, Americans, you know, tell them they're in America. Amazing how often that worked. These people would freak out, they'd break down, they'd think, my God, I'm in America. If you can catch them off balance, if you can disorient them, if you can disrupt the normal flow of their life or their thought processes, they're vulnerable.
And it was this psychological vulnerability of the enemy that interrogators from the CIA were most keen to explore.
Pain doesn't work as an interrogation technique. You can't trust somebody who says, stop, 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 and I'll give you the name of my superior or the location of my unit. It just doesn't work.
Frank Snepp was a CIA interrogator in Vietnam. He used the psychological devices of isolation and sensory deprivation, techniques borrowed in part from the British.
We had a very close relationship with British intelligence. Very, very, very close. It is a secret. I couldn't go any further. But a lot of what I did in Vietnam had owed some of its effectiveness, if there was effectiveness, to my relationship with certain British intelligence officers.
In 1972, he was ordered to break Nguyen Van Thai, the CIA's prize prisoner who had been in charge of communist networks in Saigon.
intrinsic to an interrogation is sensory deprivation.